gathered once again in the aftermath of a Pitt football game, in the aftermath of a Pitt football loss. It had been quite some time since we gathered under these circumstances, under this kind of situation, but here we are. And Pitt, of course, lost at Clemson today, 52-17. Game ended, I don't know, an hour ago, something like that. It was a god-awful long game. Went on unnecessarily long. So many reviews in the first half. So much nonsense at the end as we're trying, was stopping the clock and all this garbage. So it's been less than an hour. And, ordinarily, we're starting our live stream, our post-game show. This is the Panther-Lair post-game show. I said I should introduce it, and I should tell you who I am and about the sponsors and this and that. And we got shirts that you can buy and beers that we drink. Everybody should have their beer. I got the tall one, for this one, because I feel like I'm going to need it. I should do all those things, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to properly introduce this podcast. I don't want to properly set the stage here. I don't need to tell you what happened today. I don't need to tell you what the score was. I don't need to tell you who played well and who played poorly. I don't need to go over any little details of the game because Pitt got blown out. Facing one of the top two teams in the ACC, Pitt got blown out. For the second time this season, facing one of the top two teams in the ACC, Pitt was non-competitive. Pitt looked like it didn't belong on the field. Pitt looked like Pitt looked like an FCS team, is what it came down to. Playing against Clemson, just like it did against Notre Dame. And against Notre Dame, we could say, well, they don't have Kenny Pickett. So they lost 45-3. It speaks to nothing of the matchup advantages that Notre Dame was able to find in Pitt's secondary and take advantage of. That has nothing to do with Kenny Pickett. But we can't even use the Kenny Pickett excuse. We can't use the Joey Yellen excuse. Joey Yellen got some snaps in this game because Clemson was winning by 35 points. We can't use those excuses. There are other excuses we can find. We could talk about 3 missing offensive linemen, or we could talk about this, or talk about that, missed holding calls, or penalty this, or penalty that. It doesn't matter. At a certain point, when you're getting your brains beat in by 5 touchdowns in a game that didn't even look like it was that close, a game that, as you watched it, looked like it was more like 80-17 rather than 52-17. It doesn't matter if you were missing this player or missing that player. It doesn't matter if there was a bad holding call or no offensive pass interference called or some holding flags that should have been thrown. Those things weren't going to change the course of this game. Getting the right call, having another offensive lineman available, catching one pass, not dropping another. You could add all of those things up, and it's not going to matter. Because for the second time this season, Pitt looked like it didn't even belong on the same field as the opponent. And it doesn't have anything to do with officiating. And it doesn't have anything to do with who's available and who's not. Or any one little play. It doesn't have anything to do with kicking a field goal on 4th down from the 5 when you're down by a bunch of touchdowns. It doesn't have anything to do with whether you go for it on 4th and 7 from the 50 when you're down by a bunch of touchdowns. Those things are inconsequential when you're looking at a talent disparity this severe. And that's not to let anybody off the hook. That's not to say, well, we really shouldn't talk about those things. Yeah, go for the touchdown. Yeah, try it on 4th and 7 from the 50. What are you punting for? What are you kicking field goals for? You're getting your brains beat in. At least have a pulse about some of these things. And we could talk about the impact of not having the 3 starting offensive linemen. And we could talk about the drop passes and how that's a problem, how it continues to dog this program. And we could talk about missed penalties or bad calls. We can talk about all those things if you want. And we will. We got an hour. We got as much time as you want to talk about these things. But what we saw today is what we saw a month ago when Pitt hosted Notre Dame. And we saw 2 teams, in Notre Dame and Clemson, that are here, that are a certain level of this sport right now. And we saw another team, in both instances, regardless of who was playing, that was not at that level, was considerably set apart from that level. And Pitt's not unique in this regard. There are a lot. I believe it was Joe Bendel, the great Joe Bendel, who first said this, and I've ripped it off from him for years since then. It might have been 15 years ago that I first heard him say this, that look, there are a lot more Pitts and Boston Colleges and Georgia Techs and Minnesotas and Utahs and Arizona States and Mississippi States and Indianas than there are Ohio State and Clemson and Alabama and Notre Dame. There's a very small upper crust of college football. And I'm not going to go down some weird proletariat, the inequities of college football. And people cry and moan and complain about, Major League Baseball all the time. It's just not fair. It's not fair. Well, get someone who's going to go out and make it fair for you. Get someone who's going to go out and actually acquire the pieces to make you competitive. And if you're not going to, don't cry to me about how it's not fair. Okay? College football, maybe there's a lot of inequity in college football. Maybe there's too much of a separation. Maybe there's only a handful of teams that can actually compete. Well, you know why that handful of teams can actually compete on a year in, year out basis? Because they want to. And it's not that simple. They can hire bad coaches. They can make bad recruiting evaluations. They can put their money in the wrong place. But by God, they're putting their money in it. And that's not just the administration. We're not just talking about athletic directors and chancellors and vice chancellors and boards of trustees and any of those other. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about fans. We're talking about support. We're talking about donors and boosters. And don't get this twisted. This is not me sitting here saying you are the reason Pitt lost like this. But there is an inequity in this sport. There is a separation between the elite upper crust and everybody else. And the separation is, at the top, they want to win. They're committed to winning. And they will do what they have to do to achieve and stay at that level. And when you are a team that has issues, like your quarterback's out, or you're missing 3 starting offensive linemen, or you have this, or you have that, and you go against a team that's built like Clemson is this year, that's built like Notre Dame is this year, if they were to play against Ohio State or they were to play against Alabama, guess what happens? You're seeing what happens. Georgia Tech saw what happens. And every now and then, it's not this way week in, week out. Boston College gave Clemson, without Trevor Lawrence, a game. Pitt, obviously 4 years ago, beat Clemson. These things happen. Teams lose to other teams. But 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be all that close. It's not going to be all that competitive. And it might not be to the extreme of Pitt's games against Notre Dame and Clemson this year, with a combined score of 97-20. It might not be that extreme, but it doesn't matter. The scores don't matter. It could be 45-3 or 52-17 or 28-0 or 35-3 or 42-7 or something like that. It's just not close. And that doesn't mean there's nothing to do. There's nothing to pay attention to. That doesn't mean there's nothing to play for. It doesn't mean that these programs should pack up. I think there's very much to be accomplished within the level you're at. And why am I ranting about this today? Because we had a very stark demonstration of it once again, just like we did a month ago in the Notre Dame game. And we're reminded of where Pitt is. And we can have a lot of conversations about the players on this team. And we can have a lot of conversations about the coaching staff on this team and the administrative support for this program. And all of those things, I think, are very valid conversations to have. And they're very valid questions to ask of this coaching staff and of these players in the wake of this game, in the wake of the Notre Dame game. I think it's very valid. Very valid. Some of these things should not be happening. Although, I think if we were going to go down that path, I would tell you I'm far more concerned about this program with its losses to NC State and Boston College than I am the losses to Notre Dame and Clemson. Maybe we'll make a poll question out of that. People always like poll questions. What bothers you more with the current state, or what tells you more about the current state of the Pitt football program? The losses to Boston College and NC State, or the losses to Notre Dame and Clemson? Actually, those are separate questions. Because what tells me more about the state of the football program is how far they are from the Notre Dame and Clemson teams and the teams at that level. the other question of what bothers me more in the context of the 2020 season, what did more damage to this team in the context of the 2020 season, it was Boston College and NC State. Because those two, if you win those two, you're 7-3 as opposed to 5-5. And we'll leave the Miami game out there as what maybe could have been a toss-up game if they had Kenny Pickett playing, maybe. Although if Kenny Pickett played like he played today, I'm not so sure it would have mattered. And Pickett, to dive into some of the more details of this game, I mean, Pickett had an awful start, and some of those interceptions, not his fault. Pass gets tipped to the line of scrimmage. You want to tell me that's not his fault? Okay. I think quarterback has a certain responsibility to, change the launch point and make sure passes aren't getting batted down to the line of scrimmage, but it's fine. I mean, it wasn't just a bad throw. Although someone texted me, someone who would know things like this texted me after that play and said it doesn't matter if that pass got tipped or not. It was getting picked off. It was a poor decision. The one that went off Jared Wayne's hands, that's a fluky thing. Jared Wayne needs to catch that pass. That's a fluky one that bounced right to the defender. The other two interceptions were bad, And the one with Taysier Mack, you want to tell me that Mack did the wrong thing? Maybe. I mean, yeah, I guess you want to take that off. You want to take that off Mack's or off Pickett's plate and put it on Mack. Fine. But what about, even the plays that were not interceptions? I think he was 3 of 11 for 15 yards in the first quarter. No touchdowns, obviously, and 3 picks. So, I mean, that's 8 incomplete passes. 3 of them were interceptions. That still leaves 5 incomplete passes. And I don't think they were sharp. Now, he was better after that. Final 3 quarters, he was 19 of 28, $194, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Pretty solid stat line over the course of 3 quarters. His second quarter, he was pretty good. But overall, I didn't think Pickett looked comfortable, and part of that's going to be due to having 3 new starters on the offensive line against one of the best pass rushes in the ACC. Jimmy Morrissey said it was not the best pass rush they've faced all season. I think he would probably tell you that Notre Dame was. But Pickett didn't look comfortable, seemed to be rushing his passes, seemed to be firing fastballs at everything. I mean, people have often criticized his touch on passes, and I've long believed that he was better than people give him credit for, but he wasn't. He wasn't today. He wasn't against Clemson. His passes against Clemson, I mean, it was 100-mile-an-hour fastball every time. And, we'll look on Pro Football Focus. We'll see what the numbers look like as far as dropped passes. It's going to be high. We know there were a lot of dropped passes. Some of that's on the receiver. Some of that's on the guy throwing the ball, too. I don't think Pickett had his best game. If he played like that in the game at Miami, I don't think the result would have been any different. This wasn't the same Kenny Pickett that played against Virginia Tech, who was pretty good. And I think Florida State as well. Pretty good. But he was facing, one of the best pass rushes they're going to see all season. I mean, this Clemson defense is really, really good. This Clemson team is really, really good. And, I mean, you get the results that you got. We're going to get into the questions here in a second, questions and comments and reactions, because, I mean, that's the whole point of this. This is a post-game show. We all want to talk about this game and vent and rant and rave. And, I always kind of do this thing where I start off the show, and I do this on Tuesday nights, and I do this on the post-game shows as well. And I'll just talk for a little while. And I'm in my I have a streaming software, and then I have the YouTube webpage that we stream through, and I kind of connect the two. The software connects to the YouTube page, and so I'm in the streaming software at least just to start the show. So I haven't seen the comments that have rolled in yet. In a few minutes, I'll click over there, and we'll start and see what people are saying right now. But before we do, I'll say this: if you are Pitt, if you're a program like this and you're going into a game against Clemson, you're going into a game against one of these teams in the top 5 or top 10 that's really talented, that year in, year out is one of the best recruiting teams in the nation, is putting together a team not full of NFL future stars, but with a bunch of NFL players. You've got to play near perfect to win. You have to be. You have to be near perfect to win. And you have to get the other guy to make some mistakes. And that, if you want to boil this game down to a very simple equation, it's that's what needed to happen Pitt needed to play near perfect, and Pitt needed Clemson to make a bunch of mistakes, and that didn't happen at all. Pitt didn't play near perfect. They had 4 interceptions thrown. They missed tackles on defense and generally made mistakes. They had a crucial holding penalty that killed maybe their last gasp in this game on Bryce Hargrove when they were trying to drive after they'd cut the score to, 38-17. And Bryce Hargrove took a holding penalty on a 3rd and short. And it was just, crucial. Absolutely crucial. Or it might have been a 2nd and short. And it pretty much sapped them. They couldn't come back after that. Pitt needed to play near perfect, and they needed Clemson to make some mistakes. Not just a complete mistake-riddled game. That's not even what happened in 2016. In 2016, Deshaun Watson was still really, really good. He just made 3 crucial errors, and Dabo Swinney made some dumb mistakes on the sideline. That didn't happen today. Instead, it was Pitt that made the mistakes, and Clemson that played near perfect. And Clemson didn't need to play near perfect to beat Pitt, but they did, and the results sort of reflected it. Does everybody have a beer tonight? I'm drinking the Glutenberg. It's good. It's out of Montreal. It's pale ale. Very good pale ale. Enjoy it quite a bit. Hopefully you've got something cold to enjoy here. Let's see what's going on with people in the chat. Let's have a little conversation. You can definitely jump in as a super chatter. We appreciate that. You can donate there in the chat screen. You can support the podcast. We appreciate it. We'll make sure we get to your comments and questions and have a conversation. There are a lot of comments being posted already. A lot of conversation, a lot of questions, a lot of reactions being posted. Sometimes we don't get to all of them. We'll definitely get to yours if you hit up the super chatter. That's, you become a super chatter, and we can guarantee we'll get to you. So we'll start it off here. RJC Man 38, no comment in there yet, but we'll get to him. I'm sure he's got some things to say. We appreciate you being a super chatter. It's always nice to see some of the familiar faces showing up week in, week out. And Josh Newark gets us started and says, Narduzzi has 6 straight years of at least 5 losses. Enough is enough. Yeah, he does. You can't deny what the record is. You can't deny what, where this program has been when it's been stacked up against the best in the conference and the best in the country. I don't think there's any denying that. Narduzzi can't deny that. It's just reality. I think the decisions that people at Pitt, the decision makers at Pitt have to make is where they think the ceiling is for the program under the best circumstances, and how close they think Pat Narduzzi is to getting the program there, and where the program could go with another 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Those are the decisions they have to make. And I don't know what the answers are to those things. I don't see behind the curtain of this program, aside from occasional glimpses and conversations. I don't have a look at what's behind the curtain on Pitt football to tell you what things look like there and what kind of decision Heather Lyke would make. But that's what they're going to have to decide in the next couple of years is where can this program go under its current leadership. Joe Lanzell says, where's Izzy Abanikanda? Did he make the trip? Is he still on the team? Yeah, Israel Abanikanda, the freshman running back, has been hurt. He was at the game, the Virginia Tech game last week in Heinz Field, but he was not in uniform. He played at the end of the Florida State game, if you recall, when they were running out the clock. Him and Daniel Carter split reps at running back on the final drive and ran out the clock to beat Florida State. But he wasn't dressed for the Virginia Tech game. Seemed like he was hurt, and he did not make the trip to Clemson for this game today. So they really had 3 running backs available, really only used Vincent Davis and A.J. Davis until the very, very end when Daniel Carter got in. I think Carter even fumbled. Sometimes the end-of-game situations when it's a blowout, they I kind of lose track a little bit, but I'm pretty sure Daniel Carter, had a fumble and was recovered by Clemson. So it was actually 5 turnovers in that game. It's tough to beat, average to bad teams when you turn the ball over 5 times. If you do it against a team like Clemson, it's tough to do. John, I'm sorry, man. I always mess up your last name. Kristofich. I apologize if I butchered that. I feel like we've talked about this before. Do you think Pitt will go to a bowl game if they beat Georgia Tech? Well, remember, there's no win restrictions on bowl eligibility this year. They lifted that. The question really isn't, will Pitt get invited to a bowl game if they beat Georgia Tech? The question is, will there be enough bowls? You know you're going to have your college football playoff games. You know you're going to have your New Year's Six bowls. But, I mean, we saw this week, the Pinstripe Bowl get canceled. You know, the rest of these bowls that are the realistic destinations for Pitt, the Military Bowl, the Detroit Bowl, you know, maybe someplace like Nashville or the Sun Bowl or something. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them follow suit and go the way the Pinstripe Bowl did and end up canceling. Which is, you know, that is going to have a greater determination on Pitt's bowl prospects than anything they do against Georgia Tech. I still think they'll beat Georgia Tech. They should beat Georgia Tech. Assuming that game gets played on December 10th, Pitt should beat Georgia Tech. I don't think, you know, I'm still confident of that. I still believe they are the team that they were against Florida State and Virginia Tech when they're playing teams like Florida State and Virginia Tech. And Georgia Tech is far more on the on the Virginia Tech, Florida State side of the spectrum than they are the Clemson side of the spectrum. So, I mean, Pitt should beat Georgia Tech if that game is played on the 10th. I don't know if it's going to have any impact on, you know, their bowl destination or if they get invited to a bowl, because I don't even know if those bowls are going to exist. I could see a lot of bowls following the lead of the Pinstripe Bowl. We'll see what happens. Jason Martell says Chris Beatty is often talked about as one of the better, maybe the best recruiters on the staff. But what do we do about the wide receiver drops? It's affecting all components on our game plan at this point. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, it's obviously a problem for this team, and it's been a problem for this team the last few years. It's been a chronic issue of drops. And I mean, last year there was a problem among the receivers, but it was also, you know, maybe even more so among the tight ends, right? So I mean, and that's not going to be necessarily on Chris Beatty, but you know, to the matter of the wide receivers, you know, are they getting better? I guess is a question. I think you would look at Jordan Addison. Obviously, he's been exceptional as a freshman. I think Jalen Barden showed some good things last week. This week was not a strong performance for Jalen Barden, the freshman wide receiver. I think Jared Wayne, even though he's had some issues, I think he's shown promise. Beatty, to me, I don't know. I guess Pat Narduzzi would have to decide if he felt like a new wide receivers coach could get these guys to learn how to catch a football in a different way than whatever Chris Beatty is doing. And, you know, how many ways are there to teach a guy how to catch a football? Throw him the damn ball, make him catch it. You know what I mean? Like, it seems to me like, I don't know. It's ultimately the coach's responsibility, right? I mean, that, you know, if the wide receivers are not doing a good job making catches, then a guy like, you know, then Chris Beatty is the one who's going to have to take accountability for that. He is the best recruiter on the staff, or one of the two best recruiters on the staff, along with Charlie Partridge. He's done some great work getting Pitt involved with recruits in Virginia. He's landed a bunch of recruits from Virginia. You talk about Jordan Addison and Jalen Barden, even, and those two guys, neither one of them is from Virginia, and he had a big hand in getting those guys to Pitt. He's an important recruiter on this staff. He is an important player, an important piece of this coaching staff. I think, you know, if they got to figure out a way to teach these receivers how to catch the ball better, you know, and if they need to figure out a way to get the quarterback to throw them the ball a little bit better, I think, you know, you work on that. But I can't really imagine that Chris Beatty's in any kind of trouble. RJCman38 says, can we just talk about why Narduzzi is a failure and why change is necessary? And he said it with an exclamation point. And you're a super chatter, man, so we're definitely getting to your comments and questions. You know, can we talk about that? Look, I'm never going to excuse a 5-touchdown loss, right? And I'm not going to excuse a 6-touchdown loss like the Notre Dame game. Those games are embarrassments on a national televised level. You know, you reach the nation with your ineptitude against the best teams in the country. But more troubling to me, and this is what I was talking about, more troubling to me is the other losses. The NC State and Boston College losses. Last year's Boston College and Miami losses. The year before that's North Carolina and Stanford losses. These are the losses that will ultimately make or break Narduzzi's time. Stuff like this game today, the Notre Dame game, a month ago, terrible for aesthetics. But in terms of moving the program forward, the wins have to come from those games like Boston College and NC State. Those are the ones you can't blow. If you get a win like in a game like today or a game like Notre Dame, that's a cherry on top type of situation. That's gravy. That's what it was in 2016. If that 2016 team was so great that they could be spoken of on the same level as Clemson, then how the heck did they lose to North Carolina and Oklahoma State and get their doors blown off at Miami a week before they went to Clemson? That win was gravy on that season. That win wasn't a definition of who that team was. A definition of who that team was is when they were able to beat Duke into submission. A definition of who that team was is when they were able to outlast Georgia Tech, and they were able to beat, Syracuse in a track meet, a 76-61 track meet. Penn State even, I would say, was more of a definition of who that team was than the Clemson game in 2016. Because if that team was really who they showed at Clemson, then what happened against Virginia Tech that year? The games that will ultimately define the strength of a program and where a program is and how it's moving forward and how it's been built is those winnable games. The games where you realistically should win. You should not lose to NC State and Boston College this year if you're Pitt and you're at the point that you believe you should be at. And you're at the point where I believe you should be at. And you're at the point where a lot of the fans believe you should be at. You should not lose those games. Just like last year, you should not have lost to Boston College and Miami. Those are the games that you really have to sit down and say, okay, what happened here? Was this just bad luck? Was it talent? Was it a bad matchup? Was it coaching? Those are the games that ultimately Pat Narduzzi and any coach, I think, in this position should be evaluated on. Because as we talked about those different levels, those different tiers of college football, we talked about that, and as long as you're in that other tier, you need to compete within that tier. Super chatter showing up, Michael B. You got something to say there, Mike? You can definitely chime in, and we will get to your comment if you want to throw something in there. Dale Gribble says, I hate to say it, but in the first half, Pitt looked like they knew they were going to lose, and they were just going through the motions and trying to get through the game healthy. I don't believe that. I don't think that they were just trying to go through the motions. I think they believed that they could win, but they dug themselves a hole that they were never really going to be able to dig out of or climb out of, I guess. You don't dig out of the hole you already dug. And I think once they dug that hole, when they had the 3 interceptions and Clemson turned them into touchdowns and they went down by so much so early, I think that made I think that did dampen their spirits. But the thing is, though, Dale, they showed some life. They outplayed Clemson in the second quarter. In the second quarter, Pitt was the better team. They outscored them and they outgained them. And Kenny Pickett was pretty good. They were better on third down. Pitt was the better team in the second quarter, and even starting, and then they come out in halftime. Right, first play, Rashad Weaver gets a strip sack on Trevor Lawrence, and Pitt turns it into a touchdown. They had the momentum. And then they end up forcing the field goal attempt on Clemson's second drive in the third quarter, and they miss the field goal. I mean, things are going in Pitt's direction. So I can't really buy in that they weren't motivated or they didn't have ambition or they didn't believe they could, that they were just going through the motions. I don't really buy that. I think it's just, again, kind of coming back to what I was saying, that, if you're going to win a game like this or be competitive in a game like this, you have to play near perfect. And, and get the other guy to make some mistakes. And if you don't, then you're going to have trouble. Let's see. Jason Martell says 2 embarrassments on national TV can't be sitting well with Heather. Yeah, I mean, nobody likes to get outplayed, outcoached, and outclassed like that on national television. And I mean, you do draw a parallel to 2010, where Dave Wanstead had a blowout loss to Miami on national TV and a blowout loss to West Virginia on national TV. In addition to losing it, I think UConn might have been a Thursday night game. I think Utah was. I feel like that might have been broadcast on a broad scale. I forget exactly, but I mean the national TV blowouts were an embarrassment, but there were also some other complicating factors that year aside from just getting blown out on national TV. Yeah, nobody likes to be seen like that. You'd like to believe that you're going to compete with these teams and not just get destroyed. Joe Lanzell says, it feels like we're at the bottom of the conference, but actually our record is that we are middle of the pack, number 9. Yeah, and that's, Joe, I think there's a point there. I don't think Pitt's the worst program in the conference. I don't think they're the bottom of the ACC, but they're not the top. The key is that the top, whatever that top consists of, I think this year it's Clemson and Notre Dame, to some extent maybe Miami or North Carolina, but really the top is those two at the top. It's Clemson and Notre Dame, and then there's a gap. And then there's like Miami or Carolina or whoever, and there's a gap, and then there's everybody else. And, technically, I guess you could say that's the bottom because it's not the top, but they're not 14 or 15 in the conference. They're in that middle pack with the majority, and that's kind of how it is in college football. That there's the top, and then there's everybody else. And there's no shame in being part of everybody else, but there's a reality that they are part of everybody else. RJC Man 38 chiming in, Whipple's game plan was a joke. I mean, what was Whipple's game plan? How do you even know what Whipple's game plan is? It wasn't throwing an interception on, 3 of the first 5 possessions. I could tell you that. I'm pretty sure that whatever Mark Whipple was trying to do, it did not account for 3 interceptions on the first 5 possessions. I don't think that was, in the game plan. So if you know what the game plan was and how they were going to go about trying to move the ball down the field, by all means, I would like to hear it. Let's see. Josh Newark says, I would agree that Pitt is in the same level Boston College, Wake Forest, Rutgers, Syracuse, etc., but they don't win consistently against their similarly talented programs. I mean, I think they do. I think they're more or less competitive against those other programs that would be on that same level. I mean, so Boston College has had their number the last 2 years. Virginia Tech, they've gone back and forth with. North Carolina, they finally got over the North Carolina hump last year. That was a weird thing that just sort of dogged Pitt for about 7 or 8 years or however long they've been in the ACC. They consistently beat Duke. They're pretty reliable against Syracuse. I think they've only lost to Syracuse twice since joining the ACC. Or actually, no. Wait, did they lose to Syracuse in 2013? No, they lost to Syracuse in 2012, I believe. Well, they lost in one and they won in the other. So, but either way, I mean, they've only lost, Narduzzi lost once to Syracuse. That was 2017. But they've been, pretty reliable against Syracuse. I mean, who else? Georgia Tech. They lost to Georgia Tech in 2017. I think that's the only time Pitt has lost to Georgia Tech. Virginia, Pitt has been pretty reliable against Virginia. They beat them. Narduzzi beat Virginia 5 out of 6 years. Well, not 5 out of 6, 4 out of 5 because they didn't play them this year, but they lost to Virginia last year. Who else is? I mean, Miami is probably a slight tier ahead. I don't think they're in the top tier of college football, but they're slightly ahead. And then you go across to the Atlantic Division. We mentioned Syracuse. They beat Louisville twice since they joined the ACC. They've lost to Boston College twice since they joined the ACC. They beat Wake Forest. They lost to NC State twice. Who else is over there? Clemson in the regular season, they're 1-1. They're 1-0 against Florida State. I mean, I would say they're, I would anecdotally, off the top of my head, without writing it down, and I can go do this after we're done with the podcast and write about it later, but I mean, I would say that probably since joining the ACC, or even if you want to go just Narduzzi, he's probably above 500 against those programs. I would say, I'm relatively confident about that, particularly when you think about like a Duke or a Virginia where they don't really have, Pitt has, one loss against Duke since joining the ACC, and that was in 2014, I think it was. And they have, 2 losses against Virginia since joining the ACC. Georgia Tech. Narduzzi only lost to Georgia Tech once, but Paul Chryst lost to them, I think, a couple times. But I mean, still, you end up with a winning record there. I would say overall they probably have a pretty solid record against those teams in that same tier. Let's see. RJ Man 38 says you should limit the recruiting stars per class. That would even the playing field. I mean, that's not even like a real thing that you could actually do. You don't have. I mean, that's not even a thing you could really do. Let's see here. Michael B. Chris. Michael, I appreciate you being a super chatter and jumping in here and supporting the podcast. We appreciate that. You can also support the podcast. You click that little button down beneath the chat box, little $sign thing. You throw a couple bucks. You support us, and we definitely get to your comments and questions. Michael B. is a super chatter, said, Chris, why won't you answer if Narduzzi should be fired? Do you think he is the answer here? I don't know. I sort of, as a practice, don't really make a habit of, or as a policy, I should say, I don't make a practice of saying guys should or shouldn't be fired. Something just doesn't sit right with me saying that a guy should lose his job. That's just sort of always been my approach. I can look at it and say, I think there are questions about where this program is going. I think there are questions about where it's at right now and the direction it's headed and where it realistically can go. I think there are at times signs of promise. I think there are at times things you look at and say, all right, it seems like it's headed in a good direction. I think there are other times where it's really head scratching, where you wonder, wait, if this is this really where you're at as a program? Is it really not going to get better than this? I think those questions can be asked. But I think there are people higher than me that should make those decisions and will make those decisions. But I think they do have legitimate questions to answer about that. I think there are legitimate questions to ask about the direction of the program and where it realistically can go. And that'll be up for Heather Lyke and her group to decide. Probably not after this season, but 2 years from now, particularly if there are more of these kinds of games and not necessarily just these, when you play Clemson type of games, but, NC State, Boston College type of games next year, then yeah, I think there'll be some real hard questions to answer. Let's see here. The flea flicker, yeah, a few people comment about the flea flickers, and it was really something to see when Pitt attempts a flea flicker, and it gets picked off, and then Clemson turns around and runs a flea flicker, and it works. And somebody commented. Josh Newark says flea flickers might work if you can threaten with a running game, and that's true. You do need at least the threat of a running game in order to get a flea flicker to work. At the same time, if defenses are super keyed up to stop the run, then your flea flicker might work a little bit better too. So when you watched Clemson's flea flicker, the wide receiver was wide open. He had nobody around him, and that. That was, I think, reflective of how Pitt defends and how they attack the run and what they're trying to do against the run. Whereas when Clemson was defending it and Pitt tried to run a flea flicker, Clemson wasn't really threatened by Pitt's running game, and they were also confident that they'd be able to stop the running game with force. So when the receivers are trying to run downfield on a flea flicker, they're going after the receiver, and they have it covered pretty well, and they pick it off. It was probably not a great idea. Probably not a great call in that situation. Obviously, when the pass gets picked off, there's no question about it. Let's see. Let's see at just rolling through the comments. Joe Lanzell says Sean McDonough really hates Pitt. He disrespected us all along. Sean McDonough really came off to me as a guy who has called a lot of baseball because it felt like he was doing a lot of baseball play-by-play guy whining and complaining, particularly about replay and what replay is supposed to be. And I know, why are you replaying these? Why are you going over these plays in a game that's a blowout and the score is so far apart and all of that? And I understood the point that he was making there. But, I mean, the idea of replay is that you do it to get the calls right. Regardless of what the score is, regardless of the situation in the game, you want to get the calls right so that the game is played with integrity and honesty and all that stuff, accuracy and everything like that. But he just kept going on and on and on and on. That got old after a little while. Josh Newark says it had no bearing on the game. But I need to have one negative comment, not about Pitt. Dabo completed this week as a jerk of the week with running 2 plays at the end to give the walk-ons a touchdown chance. Yeah, I thought Dabo Swinney could have handled the end of the game a little bit better. I know all the tough guy rhetoric of if you don't like it, if you don't like them running up the score or trying to score again, you should stop them. Yeah, but you don't need to try a pass play. You know what I mean? You don't need to throw the ball late in the fourth quarter when you're up by 5 touchdowns. I felt the same way last week when Pitt went for it on 4th down and the Virginia Tech 19 late in the fourth quarter and threw a pass to Jake Zielinskis. I was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Kick a field goal and be done with it. Hand the ball off. You don't need to keep throwing it. You don't need to keep trying to pick up yards in big chunks. You've won the game. You don't need to do these things that, number one, in my own interest mostly, you don't need to do these things that are going to, could potentially stop the clock because I want that clock to run because I want this damn game to end. But that's my own sort of personal, gripe about it. But, it just in terms of, I don't know, I'm not going to go down the road of sportsmanship and this and that. It didn't seem necessary. And I understand you want to get your walk-ons out there and have some fun, but get your walk-on quarterback in and hand the ball off. I think that's what any of these teams need to do when they're, up on the top of a, if they're up at the top of a blowout win like this. Let's see. Scroll down here. Michael B., another question because he's a super chatter. We get to it. He says, hey, Chris, in your opinion, is Narduzzi coaching for his job next season in year 7? Like we finished 6-6 or 7-5. Is he gone? I don't know what it would take for Narduzzi to lose his job. I would say, yeah, he would be on the hot seat next year. The thing that is kind of a complicating factor in all of this is, this is 2020, right? It's a weird year, and we've talked a lot about the financial side of this, that Pitt has to, there's not a lot of money, revenues are down, how are you going to pay a buyout and pay millions of dollars to a new coach? How are you going to get people to stomach that when you're laying people off and their furloughs and those kinds of things? But even setting that aside, you can really look at it and say, this is such a weird year with players, out due to COVID protocols or other guys opting out and, schedule changes, and it's all jumbled up and mixed up and changed around. They weren't even supposed to play Clemson this year and all this stuff. And none of it necessarily is a 100% valid, stone cold rationale. But it is, it's worth considering. And I could see college administrators saying, we're not going to hold this year against you. Keep your program clean. Don't get wrecked by COVID. And I could see college administrators coming out of this season and saying, all right, your record may not have been what we wanted it to be. But we're not even just talking about Pitt here, right? I'm talking about anybody. All right, you went 5-5. You went 5-6. You went 4-4 or whatever it was, and you didn't have a great record. You had some bad losses. We needed to be better, and we need to be better in the future. But this year, you didn't embarrass us in terms of having tons of guys, out due to COVID. We didn't have to move too many games. We didn't lose too much money because of having to cancel games or anything like that. You took this seriously. We appreciate your dedication to the public health side of this. We're not giving a pass, but we're not going to necessarily hold this against you as much as we would have if you had gone in a regular year, gone 4-8 or 5-7 or 6-6 or something like that. I could see some administrators saying that. I don't know if Heather Lyke would say that. I don't know if it's appropriate or applicable in Pat Narduzzi's situation. I do think he's handled the whole thing well with COVID. They obviously had the Georgia Tech game postponed, so I mean it's not they're not batting 1,000, but nobody really is batting 1,000 right now. I mean, just look around the NFL. During this game on Saturday, during this Clemson game, was the reports coming out that the Denver Broncos don't have any quarterbacks. They don't have any quarterbacks. Pitt is not in that situation. Yeah, they've lost some guys to COVID protocols for a game or 2 games. They had 1 game postponed. But overall, I mean, I think, certainly by comparison, they've handled it pretty well. And I don't think there's anything that, the university would be embarrassed about in that regard. Now, I mean, they still don't want to lose to Boston College and NC State. Still don't want to have you getting blown out 97-20 by the 2 best teams in the conference on national TV. They want you to put up a little bit more of a fight than that. They want you to, handle it a little more respectfully than that, and earn a little more respect for the university than that. But, to the question, is he coaching for his job next season? Yeah, I think he's on something of a hot seat next year. I think there has to be some market improvement. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like. I don't even know what the schedule is going to be. I wonder if the ACC is going to change up the schedule a little bit. Pitt would probably like to have the schedule changed up because while I'm sure they would enjoy the ticket sales that come with having Clemson, show up at Heinz Field, it might be better to avoid that game if possible, just to get, just to get a year off from this. They only face Clemson every 2 years. How about that? Just take on Clemson every 2 years. But I don't know what it looks like of a successful season or unsuccessful season in 2021, but I think Pat Narduzzi does probably need to be on that successful side, and that's just my own sort of hunch in year 7. Let's see here. William Schroeder says, I'm actually planning on going to the Georgia Tech game. Am I a glutton for punishment? No, I don't think you are, William, for a few reasons. One, like I said, I think Pitt should beat Georgia Tech. I don't think the wins over Florida State and Virginia Tech were flukes. I think they legitimately went out and beat those teams because they were better than those teams, and I think Georgia Tech is along the lines of Florida State and Virginia Tech. I think if that Georgia Tech game had not gotten postponed, then Pitt would have come into the Clemson game on a 3-game winning streak. I really do. I believe that, and I think as long as they don't get too rusty between now and December 10th, which is what 12? Oh, it's only 12 days from now. It feels like a lot farther away to get to December 10th, but it really is only about 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. So, as long as they're not too rusty from that time off, I think they should have a good game against Georgia Tech, and they should win that game against Georgia Tech. I'll also say you are not a glutton for punishment because Atlanta's a great town. Now, I don't know what it's like right now. I'd kind of be nervous to find out about what it's like right now in Atlanta, but I have enjoyed every trip I've made to Atlanta, and I've gone there for a bunch of Pitt football games whenever they played down there in 13, 15. I didn't go in 17, but I went in 2019, and then which would have been last year. And then we've actually, Rivals.com has had a few publishers conferences in Atlanta, and so I've been down there a couple. So I've probably made 5-6 trips to Atlanta. Love it. It's one of my favorite cities to go to. Great food, great just sort of setup of the city. I really like how the city is put together. So yeah, I don't think you're a glutton for punishment for going to Georgia Tech. I think you should get a good game, and I think you should get some success. Success on the field and success in what you do outside of the game. So, and Rummy says, it's crazy how different the game would have been if we caught those dropped passes in the first couple drives. It's both frustrating and nice to think that this team won't really be much worse next year aside from Pickett. As far as if they'd caught a few more of those passes in the first couple drives, I still don't think they ultimately would have won the game. Maybe instead of 52-17, it would have been 49-28. Maybe. I don't know. Do they score 2 more touchdowns in this game? I'm not really sure if they do. Do they, or 28 would be another 11 points or something like that. I mean, 24-27, 49-27, and 52-17 does sound worse than 49-27, but it's ultimately not a huge difference. So, I think they could have kept themselves a little bit closer to the game, and Rummy, if they had caught a few of those passes early on, but I don't know how much of an impact how much of a difference it really would have made. I mean, this game was, I thought they might make it competitive. I said that before the game. But then just seeing these two teams head-to-head, Pitt was going to have to fight tooth and nail for everything it got. They were going to give up a lot on defense and have to fight, just to get a couple stops here and there. It was going to be a tall order to win this game and even to be really all that competitive. Let's see. Let's see. RJC Man 38 says, I need some administrative acknowledgement that this year was a disaster and in public statement demand some changes. We in the Pitt community need a reason to buy season tickets. I mean, your reason to buy season tickets if you're in the Pitt community is that you're a Pitt fan and you like to watch Pitt football. Whether they let you down, whether they make you happy, whether they disappoint you, or whether they exceed your expectations, that's your reason for buying tickets. Why did I go to Pirates games all those years? Why did I go to Pirates games, last year and the year before and all that? I mean, I went because I was a fan of the Pirates, because I love baseball, love the Pirates, and I went. I was a fan. That's the reason for the season tickets. If you don't want to buy season tickets because you don't know if Heather Lyke is committed to Pitt or is going to demand changes or something like that, I mean, then don't buy them. But if you are I think that's your reason for buying tickets is because you're a fan. As far as the administrative acknowledgement that this year was a disaster, I don't think Heather Lyke will ever speak in those strong of terms. I'm sure she would tell you that she wished the season had gone better. I'm sure she would tell you that she knows Pat Narduzzi wished the season would have gone better. I think that I think she would go so far as to say that. Would she make, as you say, in a public statement, demand some changes, as in like changing the coaching staff or something? No, she is not going to make, and nor should she make a statement demanding changes in the coaching staff. That's like Dan Snyder, Jerry Jones type stuff. And is that what you want out of the leadership in Pitt's athletic department? No, you handle that stuff behind closed doors. All right? That's the way it's done. That's the way it should be done. That's the way it should be done. Let's see. Joe Lanzell says, comment on St. Francis, please. Yeah, that was... we're going to switch to basketball for a minute here on our football postgame show. That was a mess. I mean, that was awful. And the worst thing about that game is that it looked a lot like... their worst points last year. They didn't seem to really get better. And I mean, that was really the case with Xavier Johnson in particular. So much talk prior to the season from me, and from people on the outside, not even just Jeff Capel and the players, but people on the outside. We said, look, if this team's going to get better in the 2020-2021 season, it has to be led by Xavier Johnson. He has to have learned some hard lessons from last season and play much better than he did a year ago. And on Wednesday night against St. Francis, he didn't look like he learned any lessons. He didn't look like he had taken anything in and absorbed any lessons from from his sophomore year. And that was the troubling thing. Now he was better on Saturday against Drexel. Played a pretty good game. He had 8 assists, 20-some points. It seems like hours and hours ago that game was played because it was before the football game, so a lot has happened since then. But he played better, and that was key. And Justin Champagnie played better. That was important as well. He really didn't play all that well on Wednesday night against St. Francis. So, this team to start the season is not as far along as I think a lot of us hoped or expected them to be or wanted them to be, but they at least played better against Drexel than they did against St. Francis. Now, they still almost let the game get away. Drexel was able to keep it close and, never let Pitt really pull away. But at least it was a step in the right direction, I think. And we'll see if they're able to continue taking those, proper steps. Coley White jumps in and says, question, do you feel this is a better effort against Notre Dame? I think you're saying which one's a better effort, this Clemson game or the Notre Dame game? I mean, you obviously have the factor of having Kenny Pickett for this game and not having him for the Notre Dame game. And that's a big part of it. And I mean, a lot of the success, I mean, obviously they scored 2 touchdowns and a field goal today as opposed to just 1 field goal in the Notre Dame game. So I guess I would give the nod to this game. I think Clemson was better. Clemson, I think Clemson's a better team than Notre Dame. I think if they have, Notre Dame has a great defense, but Trevor Lawrence is outstanding. And I think if Clemson has Notre Dame back, they win that game. They beat Notre Dame. And so I kind of think Clemson's a little bit better than Notre Dame. And so I give Pitt some credit. I feel like the defense kept battling in this game, whereas they just really got abused in the Notre Dame game. I probably would give the nod to this one, although it's close. They were both really bad losses. Like I said, they combined score of 97-20. They didn't play well in either game. Final thoughts here on this one as we head into a Saturday night. I think it's just what I said, that they're just not they're not on that level, and it's a stark reminder that Pitt, like a lot of programs, is not on that level. Not on the level where Clemson is. Not on the level where Notre Dame is this year. Not on the level where Alabama is. There are teams that are operating and working toward a different goal, quite frankly. And then there's everybody else, the other 55 or however many Power 5 teams that are not working toward the same goal, that don't start off with the same objective in mind. They might say they have the same objective, but they're not going to achieve it. And that's where Pitt is. And this game was a stark reminder of it. I would also contend that if we're talking about Pat Narduzzi's future, we're talking about where Pitt can go with him. The most important thing, and I think the decision you ultimately have to make, is can he get back to avoiding games like Boston College and NC State this year, Boston College and Miami last year. If you believe that he can, then I think he can do a good job at Pitt. He can handle the job at Pitt. If you don't believe that he can, then you have to look at other options. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com throughout the week. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The message boards are lively, as you can imagine. I think it'll stay that way throughout the weekend and probably through the week for a while, until that Georgia Tech game at least. And if they win that, then it'll quiet things down a little bit. But people are angry and upset, and I can understand that. And there's no, it's not difficult to figure out why when you get blown out 52-17. But either way, we're going to keep covering the team, keep covering recruiting, keep covering basketball, since that is in full swing right now at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So make sure you go check that out, Panther-Lair.com. And then, go to Home Field Apparel. I do want to give them a shout out. Homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code BFLAIR. It's like Black Friday Lair, as in Panther-Lair, BFLAIR, all one word. Use the promo code BFLAIR at homefieldapparel.com, and you can get 30% off your total order. They have great Pitt designs, great high-quality shirts. It's awesome product. I heartily endorse them. You definitely need to go check that out. But the deal only runs through Monday, so make sure you do that. Make sure you go and check that out. Home Field Apparel is the website, is the company. BFLAIR, BFLAIR is the promo code to do it. So go check out Panther-Lair.com, go check out Home Field, and dig into that stuff. And we will, we'll have our podcast, our regular weekly podcast on Tuesday night at 8:30. So you can go and check that out. We will talk then about everything going on in Pitt sports, try and take another view at football, and obviously dig wholeheartedly into basketball. So have a great rest of the weekend. Have a great week. We'll talk to you Tuesday night, and we'll see what's going on. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great rest of the weekend.